The United States has been around for nearly 250 years, from the Declaration of Independence to the COVID-19 pandemic. During our nearly 250 years history, we've been through a lot of wars. So today in this video, I'm going to be talking about every major war the USA has been involved in, from the Revolutionary War to the Middle East. Before I start the video, I have 3 things to point out. 1. I will be dividing this topic into 2 parts. 2. I will not include any American Indian wars individually because there's too many. I counted them and they're like 40. I'll simply include it as one war. 3. I'm not going to include every war. That would take eternity. Only the major and important ones. So, let's go! American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783. After the Continental Congress signed the Declaration of Independence, which cut all ties with Britain, Britain declared war. A long, brutal, and bloody war was fought between the American colonists and the British Army. George Washington led the American colonists to victory at Yorktown and oversaw the British surrender. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, which effectively ended the war and gave the U.S. independence. Quasi War, 1798 to 1800. Mainly a naval war and taking place in the Caribbean only, it began after French privateers began attacking British and American merchant ships. So the USA allied with Britain and took on France, which they easily defeated. France and Britain and the USA signed an agreement to end the war in 1800. The First Barbary War, 1801 to 1805. Fought against the Barbary states, which were Tripoli, Morocco, Algiers, and Tunis, which were all vassal states of the Ottoman Empire. It began after Muslim pirates of the Barbary states began taking control of European merchant ships and holding the crews for ransom. The USA allied with Sweden and other Mediterranean countries and took on the pirates, and they eventually defeated them. War of 1812, 1812 to 1815. The USA went against Britain again this time. Historians aren't sure exactly why the war started, but most agree Britain was starting to act very aggressive toward America. After affairs in the sea such as the Chesapeake Leopard Affair and the Little Belt Affair, war was declared. Britain considered this a sideshow to the much more dangerous Napoleonic wars going on in Europe on the time. Washington, the capital of the USA, was burnt to the ground in 1812. But in the later part of the war, the USA managed to get victories against the British, on land and at sea. The Treaty of Ghent was signed in 1815 to end the war. The Texas Revolution, 1835 to 1836. Famous for the Battle of the Alamo, Texas back then was controlled by Mexico, and they decided to declare independence after tensions between the two. The USA fully supported Texas independence movement, just like it had back in 1776. It ended after Mexican General Santa Anna was captured and was forced to sign a peace treaty recognizing Texas independence in exchange for his freedom. Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. Fought against Mexico over the control of Texas, which both sides said it was theirs. War was declared. Mexico didn't really have a chance against the U.S., and General Winfield Scott of the U.S. quickly captured Mexico City. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed to end the war, and soon after that Mexican cession of lands would soon begin. Bleeding Kansas, 1854 to 1861. Fought over the issue of slavery between abolitionists, who didn't like slavery, and Southern settlers, who wanted slavery. It was mainly fought in the Kansas Territory, which wasn't a state back then. Before, the conflicts were rare, but soon it got pretty nasty and the U.S. Army got involved. Kansas was later admitted as a state, but after Southern settlers left the state as a free state. Second Opium War, 1856 to 1859. The USA, allied with Western powers of Britain and France, took on the Qing dynasty in China, overselling the drug opium, which the Qings did not like. The Qing dynasty was easily defeated, and they had to sign the Kowloon Agreement, which would basically give the Western powers right to sell their opium at ports, and they would give Britain a piece of southeastern China, which would later become Hong Kong. American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. Fought against the Confederacy, it began after all the southern states seceded from the Union over the issue of slavery in 1861. The war was very brutal and scarred many soldiers. Abraham Lincoln was President of the Union during the Civil War and is considered one of the greatest presidents of all time for his capable leadership during it. It ended in Virginia in 1865 after General Robert E. Lee of the South surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant of the North, and slavery was finally abolished. However, a darker period called Reconstruction would begin after the USA sought to heal itself after the war, and reigniting tensions between white people and black people. Fun fact, a dude named Wilmer McLean's house was bombarded in the First Battle of Bull Run, the first major event in the Civil War. 4 years later, his house in Virginia was used by General Lee to surrender to General Grant, making him one of the few people to witness the first actions of the war and the last action of the war. It's honestly pretty cool. Spanish-American War, 1898. Fought against the Empire of Spain, it began after the USS Maine, a U.S. Navy battleship, exploded in Havana Harbor. Havana, which is the Cuba's capital, was controlled by Spain at the time. War was soon declared. The USA easily overtook the Spanish colonies of the Philippines and Guam at the Battle of Manila with their more powerful navy. And future President Theodore Roosevelt, then a lieutenant colonel at the time, led a group of soldiers called the Rough Riders at the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1898 to end the war, giving the USA, the Philippines and Guam, Puerto Rico, and control over the government in Cuba. This also led to the end of the Spanish Empire. American Indian Wars, 1776 to 1890. Fought against the Native American tribes of North America, who've been living on the land for thousands of years. Wow, there's actually quite a lot of them. Technically, the Native American Wars began during the days of Jamestown, but since the USA didn't technically exist until 1776, I'm just going to include that it started in 1776, even though it started much before that. The wars were mainly fought over land usage between American settlers and Native American tribes who have been living on the land for thousands of years. Famous Native American leaders tried to stop the westward expansion of Americans, such as Crazy Horse, Sitting Bull, and Tecumseh. They all failed, however. The wars reached their peak in the 1800s when westward expansion was rapid and more people were moving to the American West, triggering more war. The Native Americans put up huge resistance to the U.S. settlers, but in the end they lost. The natives were treated brutally. An example is the Trail of Tears, where tens of thousands were sent on a death trail, basically, to live on a reservation. Most people died before they reached their destination. It effectively ended in 1890 after the Wounded Knee Massacre, where 190 Native Americans were killed, effectively ending all resistance to the Americans, and the rest of the Native Americans were sent to live in reservations all across the country. However, after this, the USA became a world superpower thanks to all the new land it received, rivaling those of Europe. And part 2 will come out soon, in like a few weeks or so.